feels like in our sustainability bubble, we still think it's a technical problem. You know, we always talk about technical solutions, about technical gimmicks. We put a green facade on a building and we think, that must be sustainable. And I think we don't really have an honest idea and a clear vision of what a sustainable good architecture would look like.
Terms and conditions. The Transsolar podcast for the Biennale Architettura 2025. Episode 4. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the latest episode of the Transsolar podcast, Terms and Conditions. As in the previous episodes, we take the installation, terms and conditions of Transsolar and their partners at the Architecture Biennale in Venice as a starting point to explore the deeper and overarching themes behind it. It makes climate change and a time journey tangible, and it focuses on the side effects of comfort in the so-called Western world. My guests today are Christine Lemaitre from the DGNB, CEO of the German Sustainable Building Council, and Jochen Lam, partner at Transsolar, climate engineer and deeply involved in the installation. Thanks a lot and welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks, Martin.
Christine, why did the DGNB support this installation?
Well, we were actually very excited and very happy that there's finally an installation at such a prominent stage as the Biennale, which puts together like our technical approach to buildings, which we believe went way too far and in the wrong direction, and to make that connection to what it means for climate change and to make it really like a personal experience. And this is where we felt this terms and condition finally brings that together and people can physically experience themselves. What does that mean? What does climate change really mean? And what's the connection between all this excessive use of air conditioning all over the world? And this is where we felt we need to support that. We need to help that it happens because we believe that's a very powerful message.
I mean, okay, first of all, thank you very much. That's what I basically wanted to say because we were, as you just said, with this installation, we had the chance to do it on a very prominent location. And I think with the support of DGNB, we were able to do a very powerful introduction of the Biennale by basically installing that concept.
But there's another aspect in it, and I think that is the reason why you from the DGNB were supporting it too. Yeah, you show the impact of the ACs and climatization or air conditioning and so on. What was your first idea when you saw this?
Well, I think the air conditioning issue is at the moment an issue we don't talk at all about, you know, during our political discussions in Germany or even globally. And I read a book a few years ago about lobbyism, and that said the most powerful lobby is the one that is not part of the discussion. So air conditioning apparently seems to have a very powerful lobby because they're not part of any discussions. And this is what we liked as well as like this topic, terms and conditions, because that's what we all like click on all the time, like, okay, we agree. But we don't really read it, and we don't, I think, translating it to the air conditioning use, we don't understand what it does to our environment, like the additional heat it produces, the excessive need of energy, the noise, and this is where terms and conditions, it's not just like the temperature you experience. And I think this is what I found so powerful. And finally, we're having like a very honest installation. I think it's the only thing at the Architectural Biennale which brings together like our human behavior, our human expectation of comfort, of, you know, having modern architecture, modern buildings where everything can be controlled, but we're not able to control our environment. And actually we're just making it worse by not designing the right kind of buildings and the right kind of architecture.
The number of installations of ACs is rising globally.
Yeah, the numbers are crazy. They're crazy. I mean, if we keep on, or if air cooling of buildings keeps on growing the way it is like expected to be, if we don't do anything, we will have emissions just from the cooling of our buildings by 2050, as India and China have together combined today. And the major part, and this is what I find so dangerous, is not commercial buildings. But commercial buildings are kind of like, especially in the country of the global south, are like the entrance to this understanding of what comfort is. So you have like these steel, glass, concrete office buildings, completely air conditioned. People work there. Then they kind of get used to this kind of comfort, or what they believe is comfort. It's something as well to them, I can pay for that. It's kind of as well something of your status. And then they go and buy the first air conditioning for like the bedroom at home, then the kids' room. Eventually the whole house is air conditioned. And what we see in the numbers until 2050 is like almost 2/3 will be from residential buildings. And then we will have the same problem as we have it now in Germany with the heating. You don't change a system until it's broken. So we will have all these like old air conditioning units, like a lot of residential buildings with a lot of energy consumption, which leads to higher emissions globally, which is one problem, but as well, which will cost money. I mean, energy will get more expensive. And so I find it a very scary perspective. And that's where we feel as DGNB, we need to do something, and we need to start that discussion now really urgently.
But just help me, I think it's not a discussion about technical solution. Isn't it a discussion about the vision, how we want to live, how architecture can be?
Yeah, I mean, we use this term and conditions installation to launch our global initiative. It's called SHIFT. And it feels like in our sustainability bubble, we still think it's a technical problem. We always talk about technical solutions, about technical gimmicks. We put a green facade on a building and we think, that must be sustainable. And I think we don't really have an honest idea and a clear vision of what a sustainable, good architecture would look like. And I think at the same time, we need to go back to the root of the problem, because if we build steel, glass, and concrete buildings, one green facade is not going to fix that this kind of architecture is the wrong architecture for a sustainable future. And I was last year at a conference in San Francisco, and they showed a new housing building. It could have been in Stuttgart, So it's kind of like everywhere you have this like one-fits-all style and architecture. And that's what we want to change and address with SHIFT.
I think all these advertisements, all the Hollywood films, whatever, film productions, they transport this image. Yeah.
Car advertisement, you always see them driving by night during a glass, steel, and concrete downtown, and you don't know where that downtown is. You don't see this climate and cultural connection of architecture anymore.
That is what I wanted to say. For me, it feels really completely disconnected from the surrounding area and from the, let's call it, cultural and architectural traditions. Because people worldwide, I'm a cultural anthropologist, I know, they have adapted to various climates and they found their solutions to deal with climate and comfort. What do you think about that?
I mean, I think the reason why it happened is because I think the simple solution is because we can, right? I mean, we just put this one-fits-all building somewhere, and of course it performs, let's say, the same building performs or behaves differently here than in the US or maybe in Southeast Asia, where it's humid and warm. But we can handle all these with technology. This is the answer why we do so. But I totally agree with you, Christina, that also from my point of view, that's not the right way to do so, because I think what we don't have in mind is, of course, we can make it work, but we can only make it work by using energy to basically create the environment that we want to have. And what is weird is we basically have the opportunities to make it better. Also the knowledge to make it better.
And SHIFT tries to take up these ideas. Yeah, it's learning from the South, learning with the South. Yeah, and I think Transsolar has a lot of experience in this field. Maybe you can give us one or the other example how to take up ideas to, let's say, control the climate in a passive way or natural way without energy.
I think the simplest example is air movement. I think this is something that we totally forgot here in Germany, that it could be basically a very simple solution to create comfort without building a lot of, let's say, the whole chain that you need for cooling. Comfort is not only temperature. I think we often basically just connect it with temperature, but there are a lot of parameters that have impact. And using a ceiling fan, for example, creates in a very easy way, let's say, conditions that are fine for you, even if the temperature is higher than what we usually define here as comfort. I mean, air movement is one thing. The other thing is using thermal mass, because it basically stabilizes the indoor climate. And I mean, what we pretty often do is basically to hide our technical installation is basically to cover our ceilings with gypsum boards, and by that basically decouple the thermal mass, which is already there, right? So we just need to expose it to the room. We just cover it and basically just make use of it.
How much of energy or CO2 consumption can be saved if you work with thermal masses in the building?
I mean, of course, it depends on what temperature requirements you have in the room, but for sure you can achieve, let's say, a reduction of temperature during a day of 2 degrees, and I would say this is, let's say, in our studies or in our projects, we figured out that it's something in a range of 30% that you can save.
Wow, that's really a lot. And Christine, in the SHIFT initiative, there are also other architects, engineers, and some more people in this field. Who is there? Who is working, and what kind of ideas are there? And maybe good examples for buildings.
Yeah, I mean, the SHIFT initiative, it's basically at the moment, it's architects and engineers. And our idea is to, first of all, that's what we presented in Venice a few weeks ago, is a website where we will showcase good examples of sustainable architecture from all over the world. And we want to showcase these projects to show, look, it's possible. You know, we can build in a different way. So this is, I would say, the key of SHIFT. Then we want to as well start a university network, a global one, because we see education is a very important part. And as well, if we want to do this learning from the Global South or learning with the Global South, we need to have as well this academic exchange.
Transsolar has also experiences in conveying this message, and you established a kind of academy from Transsolar. What did you do there?
I think it was 2015 or something like that, where we started that academy program, and the idea was to invite 6 people from, we called it back then the majority world, so from everywhere in the world. 6 people coming to us and basically working with us 1 year. And after that year, the idea is that they bring it back to their countries. I think that was a great program. One of the main learnings we had is, and I think this is kind of quite well connected to SHIFT, is that let's say the knowledge exchange is not only one directional. It's for sure in both directions. We learned quite a lot, not only like cultural wise, but also like architectural wise or knowledge wise. What kind of ideas they had, which was kind of new to us, and that was kind of successful for and basically until Corona. And since we had this kind of online possibilities, we adapt the program a little bit. But in the end, it's still kind of having this interconnection still to other parts of the world.
Christine, if we talk about visions, we talk about decision makers. How do you approach these people who really take the money or who make from the governments the decisions about the way how we build our environment?
Yeah, that would be like the third column, I would say, of SHIFT, is to make it political. And political as well means to break it down to easy recommendations. And we see that many countries who don't have as much regulation as Germany, they start to think regulation, or that we see countries as well in the southern part of Europe to rethink their regulation because they're already now dealing with the impacts of climate change. And so from these projects, from these good examples, we want to extract these design principles and translate that in recommendations for actually policymakers, but as well for banks, for investors, because I think at the moment banks are starting to look for risk minimization rather than, value creation. It's kind of like, I think there's a big shift already happening. I think especially in Europe, due to the EU taxonomy, all of a sudden, I would say the first step was that people took it seriously, that banks started to take it more seriously. And now they understand that it really is a big part of their risk assessment. If they give money, if they give a loan, they want to make sure that the revenue actually will be there as well in 10 to 15 years. And this is where we see, or where we hope we will have a big impact with to be brave and have an easy messaging from Shift, and not make it always so complicated and so engineering, but to really give very basic recommendations, which then can be implemented in loan decision making, into regulation, so into like the whole network.
Mm-hmm. I think for the real estate industry, it's not only EU taxonomy, you're right in that, but they can also see that the worth of the building is declining if they're not really adapted to climate change. And we have seen that the actors like JLL in the real estate sector, they make their own research now about the impacts of climate change for the cities and the value of the buildings. And it came out, for example, Frankfurt is in Germany at first position in these cities who are affected the most by climate change. It means temperature, but also flooding and so on.
Yeah, and I think eventually, buildings became a big business model for many, especially building material manufacturers, as well developers. And there, this once fits all is like a very appealing thing. If I can sell the same product anywhere in the world, I don't have to have different, manufacturing streams. I don't have to have plants in different, I can just ship everything anywhere. And I think this is as well something we have to have an honest discussion about. And for me, the air conditioning is kind of like the symbol for everything that went wrong in modern architecture or wannabe modern architecture. But it as well goes to the supply chain. When we look at like just a window, how many parts are coming from different regions in the world sometimes. I think people are very sensitive when it comes now to textiles, where's my t-shirt made? But we have the same in buildings. And when you see as well the destruction globally on, getting raw materials out of the earth, and the built environment is a big part of that. So this is where, for us, Shift is really about learning from the Global South or with the Global South, but as well to bring this idea back that it's attractive, that maybe it's sexy to have a climate and regional and cultural connected architecture as well when it comes to the material I'm using, not just the energy concept, but as well the material that we think about that supply chain. And we had a workshop in February in Paris when we started to do the concept for Shift. And we had architects from all over the world presenting. And there were like an Indian architect and one from Nicaragua. And they had one thing in common, which to me was already one of the key learnings, is when they designed the building, they were already thinking with what material and who's going to build that building. And when we design buildings in the Global North, it's like a great rendering. Maybe we do simulations, and then we start thinking about who's building it and with what kind of materials. And I think this is already would be a big shift if we as well would think more about what is my regional network, who in the area, can do that and really integrate that into the design right from the beginning. And I think that is kind of one recipe for success.
100%. And I think it's the keyword is design by availability. And as I said, being a cultural anthropologist, this was all the time the same. The people took the material which was there, tried to adapt, make shading or anything else. Yeah. And I think in the West here now, we have really to make this shift. And it's a question of money, how far we come to get this vision into practice.
Yeah, I think it's more common sense. And I think, we as well tend to something like you just explained, which has always been the case. And Ashok Lali is an architect from India. And, we talked about it in circular, architecture. And he's like, that's what we do in every village in India.
Exactly.
What's the big deal? But I think this is as well, for me, a big learning that we maybe have to stop as well, as in Germany or in Europe or in the Global North, to then put again like new labels on something that is more common sense. Because if you put a new label, again, we make it very difficult for normal people to understand what we mean. So it becomes all of a sudden an expert topic again to do circular things or design by availability. So I think as well in our language and our approach, we have to be more, not so expert.
Yeah, more grounded.
Bubbly. Yeah, more grounded, I think is maybe the right word. Yeah.
All these things, circular economy or whatever, they were really common before industrialization started. And I don't want to have a nostalgic look back. Yeah, that's not the point. Yeah, but that we take up these ideas, which accompanied mankind for 100,000 years. Yeah, and don't think not only about these last 150 years, but to combine these two worlds in a very clever way.
I think, humans always needed to have shelter. I mean, building has such a long, evolutionary process, and if we don't learn like from the good things, and if we don't learn from the mistakes, how are we going to build the future? I mean, we're already in the year 2025. If you talk about the COP, it was 2015, the COP21 in Paris, and now we're 2025, and it still feels we've tried so much. We've read, there are so many position papers out there, reports out there, call for action, but nothing really changes on a big scale. So we need to maybe have a different approach.
Absolutely. We have to do, not only to talk or write papers, and we have to get broader circles into the game. Otherwise, we will not get this transformation.
Yeah.
And I would like to know, the DGNB has a lot of experience with the banks or insurances, because there are some context between these two parts of the system. Yeah. What is the reaction of the banks at the moment? What are the discussions you're in?
Yeah, I would say a lot of experience is a bit, we're still learning, I have to say. Every meeting with the banks, I hear words I've never heard before, and I'm trying to understand what they mean. But the banks tell us the same thing. So we just launched an initiative called Sustainable Finance with 10 banks, where we want to bring together like the finance world, where we see a big trigger. I mean, this is how our economy works, and where there's now this big understanding of risk minimization and, what are kind of like the social impacts of financing, biodiversity, climate impacts, and our very technical approach as DGNB, because we don't want the banks not just on paper by collecting maybe energy performance certificates on paper to have certain CO2 emission reduction, but to really make it reality and to bring it into the whole value chain, to the building material manufacturers, to the architects, to everyone involved. And this is where actually I have a big hope that maybe that transformation is coming from a group of actors or stakeholders we have not kind of had part of our discussion. I have big hopes that maybe that is the additional trigger we need. I mean, in the end, it's like it's a puzzle. So it's not like one by themselves, but I think we need to have the finance sector as a big part of that puzzle, active and speaking the same language as we do.
Of course, transformation consists of activity of all sectors. Otherwise, there's no transformation, but only activities in a limited field. But I learned that the DGNB also made training courses for banks, for hundreds of employees, or even maybe thousands, that they understand much better what is really sustainable building and construction. What does it mean? What kind of impact does it have? And where are the risks? That's right, huh?
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, this is what we did for a bank who's doing especially like finance, private financing, because that's what I learned as well. I didn't know that mostly, like for many people, especially when it's about renovation, the first point of contact they have is like the craftsman. It's not the bank, it's not the engineer, it's not the architect. It's normally because something broke. And then, someone comes and, explains to them like the alternative heating system. And then these people go to the bank. And the bank has a big interest that, okay, if they want to have a loan to maybe fix their heating system, ideally they would transform the building by getting a heat pump or like doing PV on the roof, like doing additional, more holistic things. And this is where we did a training for the people in the bank to have like this holistic understanding of what could be the options, what are like the pros and cons, to help basically the client to maneuver that better, or to find for them maybe the right concept, or at least get the mindset that they're like, okay, maybe if we do something now on our building, we're not just renovating the bathroom, maybe we're looking at it, in a different way, and we're going to get an energy consultant to do some advising for us.
And what about you, Jochen, in your planning teams, with the architects and the builders and so on? What are your experiences? Can you see that there's a shift already starting regarding the points Christine raised?
I think the people we are working with, and especially the clients we are working with, you just mentioned it, they're of course coming from a certain bubble, or they're interested in sustainability, interested in doing something, let's say, different from conventional buildings. And of course, what we see is that there's a certain shift basically away from using concepts with a lot of technology basically to low-tech systems, to systems which are robust and work mainly by themselves. But of course, here in Europe, we still need a little bit of technical auxiliary. But there's a certain shift that we see. That's for sure. Even in the planning teams, especially for the architects, especially for the clients, there are some, how to say, there are always people in the planning team who are still on the conventional path. But this is how I would say it takes a while for a transformation.
No, that's normal. That these change processes take really time.
Yeah.
But that's, I think, encouraging to hear that banks are now more sensitive in this field.
Yeah, and I think we need to have this like ping pong. And I think we need to realize that many buildings or like the decision makers are normally not trained engineers or architects. And that we have a lot of buildings, even in Germany, they're built without an architect. So the question is like, what's the pressure point, or what's like the trigger point? And this is where, like I said, I think the banks are very crucial, but as well, I think what we discussed before, I think we need a different kind of communication, because, we are in sustainability. It always feels like we're answering like a good lawyer. If people ask us, what's the right thing to do or how much does it cost? You're like, oh, it depends. It's kind of what a lawyer always tells you.
That's always a good answer.
Yeah, it's always a good answer. But like a lawyer tells you, oh, it depends. The liability is with you, so you can do it here, you can do it there. So, and I think, and this is what we want to do now with Shift, is to find a clearer message and to really, make it clear there's a black and white. There are certain things that are just no-goes. And a building that needs an air conditioning to work properly is, there's just something fundamentally wrong. But the reality is that in Germany, modern office buildings, we have already 2/3 are completely climately controlled with air conditioning. We don't put air conditioning in hospitals. This is not part of the programming of our German hospitals. And I think this is what we need as well to address, that we put air conditioning at the moment into buildings mostly, to say it very extreme, where you have healthy people ideally working, and the only reason is that the lawyers can sit in the suit in the office when it's 35 degrees outside. But we're not putting air conditioning where maybe people are ill or they really would need it. And I think this is as well what we need to have an honest discussion about it. And that's a crazy thing that happens. And if you look at it globally, it's as well part of your financial status, what you can afford and what you cannot afford. And normally the people who cannot afford anything, they are the most, threatened part of the population when it comes to excessive heat and exposure to heat.
So do we talk about myths? Because as long as I'm in this field of sustainable architecture, all the time, the same question. Yeah? Yes, we will do something for sustainability as long as we have, at the moment, we have enough money. Yeah, industry and the same thing. But what is the cost right now? DGNB has made a...
Oh, it depends.
Yeah. DGNB has made a lot of research on this topic because the arguments are always coming. So what is it now? It depends, I understand.
It depends, but we see many projects where it doesn't include additional costs. But it comes back to what we discussed earlier and what Shift is about. It doesn't cost more for the projects where, they started at the beginning as well answering the question for them of sufficiency. How much do I need to build and what kind of architecture is the right architecture? And sure, it has additional costs if you build the way we've always built. And then we see sustainability as like a gimmick. If I add things to something I would do anyway, sure, it costs more because it's additionally. So if to have it integrated into the architecture right from the beginning, and as well maybe ask yourself the question, do I need to build so much building, or do I, have more like multifunctional spaces I can do with less, then that's what we see. It's cost neutral, but it starts right at the beginning, at the core of the problem. And this is, I think, what we need to get in people's minds and heads. And this is where I think we need to have the education done, that sustainability is not this add-on, not this plus, because that doesn't make the building better. We can do so much more with less if we do an integrated, good architectural design from the beginning.
That is something that we experience quite often. Like when we are joining a project in a later phase, I think what is frequently missing is that in projects they are not defining the targets. Like where are we basically heading to? What is our energy goal? What is basically the requirement for comfort? What do we want to achieve? What is sufficient? And this is pretty often just not defined. You just start planning. You just start to draw piping and ducts and things like that, without knowing where we basically want to end up. And I'm totally agreeing with you, Christine. Going that path and then someone in LP3 thinking of, maybe we should do something for sustainability, that will lead to higher costs for sure. But if you have that process from the beginning, you can even achieve cost saving, at least over the lifetime of the building. Maybe not in when we're talking about invest, but if you take into account also the operational costs, it's from my point of view mostly cost saving.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, and this comes back to my theory about, good lobbyists. If you talk about costs as well politically in Germany, it's like everything should be less. But the part that increased the most in the last 5 years was the technical or mechanical part of a building. Yeah. So if I want to do, and actually that goes very well together with sustainability. If I build a low-tech building, I have less technical equipment, so I have less of the expensive part in the budget. But this is where we see there's a lot of like pushback from, the engineers who are in charge of that, not Transsolar, but there are others, and that is kind of like the problem of the system. If the money you get paid is based on the volume of what you have designed. So if, there's more technical equipment, it's like a bigger sum, and then they get more money for their work. So to do low tech or to do a different kind of engineering, is a completely different approach. And this is where we have to address this question of what does the industry want and how can we make the transformation happening and how can we make it worth their while to do good engineering? Because we need buildings that last 100, 200 years, and no technical equipment is going to last 30 years.
Thomas Auer, he made a research with colleagues about schools. I found it really interesting. So they were analyzing a school from 1896 or something like that. And they found out this building, which was made, as I said, 120 years ago, performed really, really good. Much better than the newer ones with a lot of technique. So the question is how to deal with that. And that is why I say, let's bring sustainable discussions back to common sense. And one point in the communication and this argumentation is very often, sustainability, this aspect costs this might cost this. But in the planning process, there are very often discussions about money, which are very short and which have an enormous impact. Maybe you have an idea about that because you have seen a lot of projects.
Yeah, and I really don't believe in that, where everyone thinks like cost is a very neutral criteria for decision making. I don't think so. I think it's very subjective. And many things, that went wrong in the building sector were because we thought for economic reasons. I mean, this is where, the size of the facade got like very slim, so we can rent out more square meters. I mean, that was like the power behind this glass, steel, concrete architecture we see. It's not about people. I mean, sure, now there's the argument, there's a lot of daylight for the people. But in the end, it was like maximum amount of square meters we can rent. The same is with ceiling heights. I mean, the school you referred to, and they did then that project, this 𝗖𝗿𝗶𝗁𝗱 in Bad Aibling, where they brought up the ceiling heights again, which makes more sense, like for the thermal comfort in a room. But this is something we were trained not to do anymore, because you like bringing it down as much as possible, because then you could add another story and you can rent again more space. So I think we as well, if we want to be so economic, we have to as well look at it in a very honest way and maybe realize like the things we've done for economic reasons, that they were not the things that made a building future-proofed. And this brings me back to the banks, where we need to bring them on the table, because they have a different perspective on what does risk mean, what kind of real estate they would like the money go to, and that is not like this short-term economic things we've made believe that they would make sense.
maybe you can give, let's say, the URL of Shift to our audience. Where can we find more information about Shift?
The website is shift.global, where you can find more infos and hopefully even more in a few weeks. So we would be happy for everyone to sign up to support it. We will actually launch a program where practices like Transsolar can say, yes, we're a Shift supporter. But if they say, yes, we're a Shift supporter, they have to commit that they will have all of their staff take our, I think it will be 90 minutes training module, which will be for free, but where we want to start with training in an easy way, do that storytelling on why we need Shift, what are the arguments. And this is what we want to offer in the first step to practices, to architectural engineering practices, to scale things, because I think Transsolar, everyone is kind of like on that pathway, but we see many engineering or architectural firms, they have like 2 or 3 people in charge of sustainability, and the rest is doing what they've been trained to do. So we have the hope by training everyone, kind of getting out of that bubble, that maybe we find people where it resonates in a different way and where, all of a sudden from different angles, it becomes a topic in the projects, in the conversations with the clients, in your private life. And this is what we will offer with Shift, like this support Shift with your practice, and then everyone gets trained.
Jochen, you'd like to comment on it?
No, sounds good. We're going to support it.
You're a supporter already. Okay, so I would say, hey guys, we had a long discussion and I loved it. Thank you very much for being here. And I hope dear audience that you got a lot of inspirations from Christine and Jochen. Thanks a lot for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Terms and Conditions, the Transsolar podcast. Brought to you by Transsolar Energietechnik and TUM, Chair of Building Technology and Climate Responsive Design. Production by Prössler Studio. Next time, we dive into ETH Zürich's climate calculations, how to make data meaningful, and how storytelling in climate science can impact society.